We take a look at the Columbus Blue Jackets, their offseason moves, and more on this edition of Locked On NHL Game Night.
When that final horn sounds, you know it's time for Locked On NHL Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. Prepare to experience game day reactions like never before, only on Locked On NHL Game Night. Your team every day.
Hey, hockey fans, welcome to Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Thanks for making Locked On NHL Game Night your place to get a recap of the night in the NHL during the regular season, the playoffs. We are available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, an LA Kings fan on the West Coast. He is Shukri Wrights, a Boston Bruins fan on the East Coast. And together, we're normally discussing all the goals, saves, big moments, and stories from the night in the NHL, but obviously it's the offseason. No games to recap, but we're here to help you get ready for next season by previewing all 32 NHL teams between now and opening night. And before we bring in our local expert, Shu, today we're going to learn all about the Columbus Blue Jackets.
This is going to be probably the most touching episode we've done yet, considering the Blue Jackets and what they just went through over the course of the past calendar year. And I'm really excited and looking forward to talking with Jay to get his perspective on the season that was, and as well as talking about dealing with the aftermath of the death of Johnny Gaudreau.
Well, let's get right into it and welcome in the host of Locked On Blue Jackets. His name is Jay Forster, joining us to give us his insight on the team that he obviously covers every day. Jay, thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, guys. I am, I'm always excited to talk about this team. And in fact, will not stop doing it if you ask me. So
that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
And before we get into the offseason and look ahead to next season, obviously, as Shukri talked about, it would be hard not to at least touch on what happened last year. We just had the 1-year anniversary of the passing of Johnny Gaudreau and his brother Matthew in that tragic incident. The Blue Jackets valiantly went on without Johnny Gaudreau last year. Just missed out on the playoffs. When you look back on everything that happened last season, what is your takeaway from everything?
So we're recording this on September 2nd. Yeah. Just for clarification's sake. So if you told me this time last year that the Blue Jackets were going to finish, 2 points out of a playoff spot, and in fact be in a playoff spot for much of the season, 2 30-goal scorers, like just Sean Monahan a point a game, I would have probably laughed in your face, right? Like, I was, before Gaudreau passed, I was fully ready. I was like, the Blue Jackets should be a playoff team. They should take huge steps forward. And then something like that happens, and it's like, okay, how do you recalibrate everything that's happened? And you look at what this team went through, and like, I said it in the season previews that we did last year, like, if this team just falls apart and is like the worst team in hockey, you'd understand it, right? Like, no one would judge them, no one would blame them. And they didn't. They really I don't know whether that was, a case of they really rallied around this idea of playing for Johnny, because that was the big theme the season. Obviously, they had his number hanging in the rafters for the entire season. They had his jersey hanging up in every single locker room they were in, home and away. That was a big part of it. But I think it's been a tough year. I keep thinking, it doesn't quite feel real yet that he's like not going to be a Blue Jacket anymore. Even now, a year on, we've done the whole season without him. But the fact of the matter is, it sucks. Like, he's not going to be a Blue Jacket anymore. He's not going to get to put that jersey on anymore. But the team really, really rallied around that. And I think that is a huge part of last season. Like, it was really sad to go through. Obviously, it was really, really hard. And I can't imagine being in their shoes. Like, if your coworker died and then 2 weeks later you were like, well, I'm going to get back to work like nothing's wrong. I don't know that I'll be able to do that, right? You look at the countless tributes that they had throughout the season. They, I think, they did their own on home opener. They obviously, when Calgary was in town, they did something. When they were in Calgary, they did something. And they were part of, I think, 2 other separate like tributes to him, because there were 2 other teams' home opener opponent, and every home opener had a tribute to Gaudreau. So, they had a lot to go through last season, and it was really, really tough. And I don't know, like, sitting here a year later, I'm still kind of amazed that they managed to put an entire season in, because I don't know that I would have been able to. I don't know that I would have been able to play hockey if that happened to me, right?
Certainly, and it's part of the reason why I think even a year later, it's still so surreal that Johnny Gaudreau and his brother Matthew Gaudreau are no longer with us. And I want to touch on Johnny for the purpose of the show, because to go through a loss that you can't even begin to fathom, you can't even begin to put to words, is difficult on a human being. But now imagine an entire organization. Like, imagine an organization that not less than 5 years after losing Kivlenix in that tragic fireworks accident, and now Johnny Gaudreau, who was expected to be a fixture and a big part of the Blue Jackets for many years to come. So my question is, how did the Blue Jackets just summon the strength to be able to carry through what was an especially difficult time the first month of the season? You saw the tributes at home at their home opener. You saw the tribute when they went to Calgary. How are they able to just galvanize as a group and to be able to play through such tragedy and heartbreak?
I think a large part of it was Sean Monahan, right? Obviously, he signed in Columbus to play with his best friend. He was actually he was packing up his car to drive down to Columbus when he got the news, right? Like, he didn't even make it to Columbus before he found out. And I think a lot of it is just, again, like, you could really understand if he'd been like, you know what? I don't want to go. I don't want to play for Columbus this year. I don't want to play hockey this year. Like, he came to Columbus for Gaudreau, and he came. He was an incredible player on the ice, 57 points in 54 games. Obviously, he missed about a month and a half with an injury, but he was a great on the ice presence for this team. He was a great off the ice presence for this team. I know that a lot of the young players of, Adam Fantilli and Kent Johnson, Cole Sillinger, have all talked about how great it was having Sean Monahan around to be that kind of mentor. But I think a lot of it was he showed up and he did his job and he played well. And I think that was a real kind of, well, if he can do it and Johnny Gaudreau was his best friend, then I can do it as well, right? So I do think it was very much a case of, yes, we're going to win it for Johnny, but also we can't let Sean Monahan down, because if that's what it is. If he can do it, then so can I. And I do think the organization really rallied around that, and also just kind of like the idea of, the home opener when they did the tribute, and it was really hard to watch and everything. But Meredith Gaudreau, Johnny's wife, did a little video that I believe plays before every Blue Jackets home game, and it basically just said, love the game that John loved, play the game that John wanted to play, right? And I think that was what it was. It was, well, Johnny would have wanted us to play hockey, so we're going to play hockey, and that resulted in, quite frankly, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in a second here, like, they overachieved last year. Like, they shot at a ridiculously high percentage. Like, they led the league in 5-on-5 goals, I believe, which is kind of nonsense when you just kind of look at the team on paper and you look at some other teams on paper. But they overachieved, and I think they did it for Johnny, and they also did it for Sean.
A quick question for me again on last season. As you well know, this was a very streaky team. They had a pair of 6-game losing skids. They had a pair of 6-game winning streaks, including one to end the season to keep their hopes alive until the very, very end. Was that a byproduct of the young roster, and is that kind of one of the storylines going into this coming season, just being a little bit more consistent, and maybe that would have been the difference in getting into the playoffs?
Yeah, for sure. Consistency was a huge thing last year. Even the players that, were like, Kirill Marchenko had 31 goals last year, but he also had, I think, 2 or 3 stretches where he would go, 7, 8, 9 games without a goal, and then he would score, 4 goals in 3 games, and then he would go, so even for the players that did well, like streakiness was a huge issue, and inconsistency was a huge issue. Goaltending was inconsistent. You either got incredible goaltending from Elvis Merzlikins, or you got just abysmal goaltending from him. I think it's part of, yes, being a young team. I think also the emotions, but it's definitely something to look at when the season starts. Is 6-game winning streaks are fun, right? But I would take winning 2 games and losing 1, and winning 3 games and losing 1 over winning 6 games and then losing 6 games, and then winning 6 games and then losing 6 games. Because frankly, my blood pressure is too high already. And I would love if they would get just a little bit more consistent, so I don't have to spend, the 5th game of a losing streak being like, please just score a single goal. Just score 1 goal, I'm begging you, right?
For sure. And coming up, we're going to get into the offseason moves and what the lineup for next season looks like for the Blue Jackets, including talking about who's the number 1 goalie. We'll do that next here on Locked On NHL Game Night. NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure that you are ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet, player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It is quick, easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, we are continuing with Jay Forster. He is the host of Locked On Columbus Blue Jackets. Jay, looking at the offseason, the team re-signs Ivan Provorov, 7 years, $8.5 million per season. I see your head moving already when I mentioned that. If you're watching on YouTube, you trade for Charlie Coyle and Miles Wood, re-sign Dmitry Voronkov, bring in Isaac Lindstrom. All in all, your thoughts on the offseason it was for Columbus?
It was fine. It was not an abject disaster. There are some moves in there that were very good. I particularly liked re-signing Dante Fabro for an extremely reasonable cap hit. I thought the Voronkov contract extension was fine. I liked bringing in Charlie Coyle. I didn't love the trade so much. It was the problem with the offseason is, and I kind of am guilty of this as well, is I think a lot of Blue Jackets fans had talked themselves into them making a huge splash and, going out and getting Mitch Marner or Nikolai Ehlers or Brock Besser or Aaron Ekblad or whoever, right? And obviously the cap situation, as the cap shot up for the first time in what feels like a million years, teams got to keep their guys. I think that really the only big names that moved would have been Marner, Ehlers, and Vladislav Gavrikov. I'm pretty sure every other big free agent just kind of stayed where they were. So it felt a little bit like a flop of a free agency, specifically just because it was like, well, we didn't really do the exciting move that we wanted. I don't know that an exciting move was ever really in Don Waddell's mind. I don't like the Provorov contract. I've talked about it at length on my show. I think it's too long. I think it's for too much money. And I think it was very much a case of he held all of the cards and Don Waddell was like, well, if I don't sign him, who am I going to sign? Now, I personally, we can get into, would it have been better to sign, let's say, Dmitry Orlov for 1 season and make do with a less effective defenseman for 1 year and revisit the option later on than just give him 7 years for $8.5 million because he's the only option you have. But that's whatever, right? It's done. He's on the team. He's going to be on the team for the foreseeable future. Maybe he'll be worth that contract. I'm not convinced. So for me, there was some real wins. There was some losses. I particularly liked the draft. I thought the draft was very strong. Obviously, that's not going to be something that has an impact on the team next season, but you bring in prospects like Jackson Smith to add to the prospect pool. I really like Pyotr Andrianov as a goalie. It was a solid B- of an offseason, I think. Some A+ moves, some D- F moves. Meet in the middle,
One of the highlights from last season was the historic season that Zach Werenski had, becoming the first defenseman in NHL history to average a point per game. And Jay, when I look around defensemen in the NHL, specifically that the elite top tier defensemen, and you saw the season that Zach Werenski had, do you believe that Werenski finally touched the surface of what he's capable of, or do you think that there's still another level that he can get to?
So Werenski was really interesting this season because it felt like a real surprise to a lot of non-Blue Jackets fans, but like to me, I was like, well, this is the Werenski that we've seen kind of on and off. He's had some health issues. He's missed a couple of seasons due to injury. Like I think not last season, the season before, he separated his shoulder in game like 13 or something, and he was a point a game player up until that point. Missed the rest of the season, right? He's had these flashes. He's had this potential. This was his first season with a consistent defensive partner since Seth Jones left, which I believe would have been in 2021.
Yeah.
So it's been a minute since he's had the same defense partner for the bulk of the season. I think that really helped. I think that's why bringing Dante Fabra back was so important, right? Because if you've got a guy that plays well with your number one guy, you keep him around and you don't, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? I don't know if there's another level to him. It wouldn't surprise me, but at the same time, it feels very much like I don't want to ask for too much and get it taken away, right? Like a point a game defenseman is phenomenal, right? And I know that his contract got a lot of stick when it was signed. He's making more money than I believe both Cale Makar and Quinn Hughes, who are arguably the top 1 and 2 defensemen in the league right now. But I think that you really can't ask for much more than almost 25 goals, and I think it was 82 points in 81 games for Werenski. Like, would I love for him to hit the 30 goal mark and maybe the 100 point mark? Sure. I don't know how likely that is. I would love to see a season like the Erik Karlsson season in San Jose a couple of years ago from Werenski, but I'm not going to sit here and be like, we need more from Werenski, because I think if this is all he's got to give and we get, again, consistently 20 to 25 goals and 80 points out of him, you're laughing. Like, that's incredible for a defenseman.
Yeah.
Wanted to ask you about the situation in net. Jet Greaves, great name, comes in late in the season, provides a spark. You know better than I what the projection is as far as him and his development and where he's at. Elvis Merzlikins has been there for a while with mixed results. Is Jet Greaves ready to take over the number one job? Is there a camp battle? How do you see the goaltending position working out this year?
Well, we're going to find out, aren't we? Like, this is the thing. And Jet Greaves has been excellent since he came to the organization, right? He was a guy, and for people who maybe don't know the Jet Greaves story, I'll kind of do the cliff notes. He was an undrafted goalie. The Blue Jackets ended up signing him back in, I believe it would have been 2021, just after COVID, because they did not have a goalie that was eligible for the prospect tournament that season. The only goalie they had that was eligible was Danil Tarasov. He was not going to come over from Russia in time. So they basically had to frantically sign a goalie. The goalie coach at the time knew a guy who basically said, hey, I've got this kid. I really think an organization should give him a shot. Do you want to try him out? They took him to the prospect tournament. He was incredible there. He ended up signing an AHL contract on the back of that. Has been one of the best goalies in the AHL over the last 2 or 3 seasons. Has been named to the All-Star game down in the AHL. And then obviously, I think everyone was paying attention to what he was doing at the end of last season. Played in the final 6 games for the Blue Jackets, including playing both games in a back-to-back. He played Saturday afternoon and then played Sunday night. Won both games, had 2 shutouts in those 6 games. It was a really incredible story, right? The Blue Jackets, who had kind of fumbled their own way out of a playoff spot. They had a truly miserable March. And then as it happens, the Canadians kept losing games, and Jet Greaves comes in and gives the Blue Jackets a chance to make the playoffs, right? Really, really great story. Is he the future in Columbus net? I don't know. It was a very small sample size that we saw from him last season. I would love if he was the guy, but I'm not going to sit here and say that we're going to get, a 936 save percentage out of him for an entire season, On the flip side, the Blue Jackets have been so inconsistent. Again, like the last time they've really had true consistency in goal would have been Sergei Bobrovsky. And that was the 2019 season. The 2018-2019 season, I believe, was his last season in Columbus, right? And they haven't really had consistent goaltending since then. So I think a lot of people they get any kind of, and I'm guilty of this as well, any kind of semblance of, oh, this might be a good goalie. They kind of latch onto him, right? Like we saw that with Elvis, who had an incredible rookie season for the Blue Jackets, 5 shutouts in 8 games in a stretch of his rookie season. Finished the season with an incredible save percentage, and he's gotten, statistically worse and worse since then. Now, I do think there are underlying reasons for this. We talked about the passing of Matiska Vlasic earlier. That was Elvis Mozikins' best friend. So the guy's been through a lot over the past handful of years. I think, so I extend a lot of grace to him for being in a difficult place and having the kind of job where if you screw up, then a red light goes off behind you and thousands of people boo at you. But if Jet Greaves can show even just a smidgen of the consistency that we got from him in the AHL, the job's going to be the starting job is going to be his by November. It could be his by the end of training camp, depending on how Elvis shows out in preseason, depending on how Greaves shows out, right? I think the first game of the season is going to be really telling as to who gets the start for the home opener.
We're going to look at the Blue Jackets projected lineup, get Jay Forster's thoughts on that next here on Locked On NHL Game Night. All right, we're wrapping it up with the host of Locked On Columbus Blue Jackets, Jay Forster. And Jay, we're going to throw up a little graphic here for the people watching on YouTube. For those not looking, I'll describe it here, but this is the projected lineup we have from the good folks at Puckpedia. Looking at the lineup for the Blue Jackets, I wanted to get your thoughts on this and tell me how accurate you think this is, and maybe if there's any battles for positions coming up. But they have a top line of Thomas, Snuggerud, and Buchnevich, Shen, Kyrou, and Holloway on the second line.
Eddie.
Yes.
This is the Blues, not the Blue Jackets.
This is the Blues, not the Blue Jackets. Thank
Sorry
you.
to make you. There we go.
No.
Like, I can talk about the Blues if you want, but.
Well, maybe at some point we will. I apologize. Thank you for correcting me. Monahan, Marchenko, and Voronkov, the top line. Fantilli, Johnson, and Jenner on the second line. Coyle, Chinnikov, and Sillinger, the third line. And Lundestrom, Olivier, and Wood, the fourth line. Your defensive pairings, Werenski and Fabro, Provorov and Matvichuk, and Severson and Gabranson, excuse me, with the goaltending tandem, as we mentioned, of Merzlikins and Greaves. How does this look to you? Is this about accurate, or is there anything that you would maybe change or you think could change during the season?
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be small changes throughout the season, right? If a line stops scoring, you mix it up. There's tweaks I'd make here. This seems about right in terms of, like, I really like that top line. Again, that was one of the best 5-on-5 top lines in all of the NHL last season. Voronkov's going to be a really interesting player because he got called out by the GM during the offseason and basically said he needs to fix his conditioning because for the first 50 or 60 games, he was great. And then he completely disappeared after that. Still somehow managed to get 23 goals despite disappearing for the last 25 games of the season. So, if he can figure out his conditioning, that's going to be great. But apart from that, again, I like the second line. Fantilli and Johnson were really great together. Bringing Coyle in gives them that 3C. I think Sillinger's going to be effective at the wing. Chinnikov's going to be interesting because obviously he requested a trade that hasn't materialized yet. He wants more ice time, I think. So again, we'll see. Sounds like he's on his way into Columbus for training camp, kind of as we speak almost. So he's going to be really interesting. If he goes, who kind of is that middle six winger that they are kind of thin in the ground for? Defense is basically spot on. I'd swap Gabranson out for Jake Christensen, who's a younger defenseman who played really well with Severson last season. But I think Gabranson's one of those guys that, you want him on your roster. You don't necessarily need him playing every night, but sometimes you need, an adult, right? And Gabranson was a really good adult for the team last season. And then goaltending, again, we just talked about it could go either way, right? My guess is it's probably close to a true tandem, depending on, knock on wood, injuries, depending on you play the hot hand. But frankly, I think Merzlikins is a goalie that plays better the less he plays. And I think Graves is a guy that plays better the more he plays. So I wouldn't be surprised to see something like a 50-30 split in favor of Graves. Merzlikins misses a lot of time with injuries, with fatigue, with illness. So hopefully having someone that is willing and ready to take a large share of those games, you'll get a better, more consistent Elvis. But like overall, this seems about right. Like I said, there's tweaks I'd make, but for the most part, I'm like, yeah, no, this looks like what the opening night lineup is going to be based on the roster and like what I know of Dean Everson and his coaching.
For me, the biggest question I have for the Blue Jackets this season is the health of Captain Boone Jenner. Because when Boone Jenner plays, he performs. And when he performs, the team goes. And it's not a coincidence that the last time that Boone Jenner has played at least 70 games in a season was 2019-2020, which is the last year that the Blue Jackets made the playoffs. And considering that Boone Jenner had an injury suffered that was impacted before the season even started, changed his entire season altogether, may have also played a role in terms of the Blue Jackets also missing the playoffs as well. So my question for you is, how much can you expect Boone Jenner to remain healthy in order for the Blue Jackets to have a legitimate chance of making the playoffs and maybe even making some noise in the postseason?
I mean, that's the question, isn't it? Like you said, the Blue Jackets go when Boone Jenner goes. He's actually a really interesting player. If you look into like the underlying stats and stuff, like his underlying stats are basically not quite replacement level, but like he is a perfectly average middle six guy, right? He's not startling. I think the fact that he's getting to play that role rather than being the team's top line center, as he's kind of been forced to be for the last couple of years because they haven't had any centers, basically. Get him being able to play wing and play lower down the lineup has been really great for him. He makes other players better. Like if you look at the underlying stats of it, is his own individual stats are fine, but players that are on the ice with him see a huge jump in their own underlying like possession stats and stuff like that, which is really interesting, I find. And yeah, it absolutely has an impact on this team. I think he gets a lot of stick from other fan bases. We won't name names of fan bases, but, there are some teams where your captain is your best player, right? And I don't necessarily think that needs to be true. I think your captain has to be your best leader. And I think Boone Jenner is, though on the surface, a very boring human being, and is not like he's not like the most fun interview in the world, right? But for better or worse, he is a very good captain. He's been a good captain. He was actually supposed to be named the captain way back in 2015. They had a captaincy vacancy, and then Nick Foligno just kind of emerged out of nowhere to become the best candidate for captain. But back in the day, it was supposed to be Boone Jenner's job, and he got kind of overtaken by Foligno, who, in fairness, was a great captain. So I get it, but the team's success, I don't think, is necessarily kind of predicated on whether Boone Jenner is healthy and producing or not, but I do think it makes their job a whole lot easier, right? When he's on the ice, he's effective. And he's a real Swiss Army knife player. There was a couple of seasons ago where he played every single position at forward. And by that, I mean he played on the left wing, the center, and the right wing of all four lines, which is bonkers, quite frankly, and you shouldn't be asking your players to do that, but he did it and he succeeded, right? He's a good guy to have on the team. The players love him, the coaching staff loves him. When he's healthy, he's great. The problem is, like you said, he hasn't been fully healthy for what's that, 6 seasons now? 5 seasons? And that to me feels a little bit like a problem. So if you can keep Boone Jenner healthy, great, 2 thumbs up. If he's injured again this season, that feels like that's a problem, right? Which sounds stupid to say. Like, yeah, obviously, if a player's being healthy is good, players being injured is bad. But it really feels like Boone Jenner is a surprisingly big loss for this team that has all of these star young players on it. You need the glue guys, right? And Boone Jenner is one of the better glue guys in the league, in my opinion.
Jay, final question from me. From a management standpoint, when you look at head coach and general manager Don Waddell, Dean Evason, you feel like you're on some pretty solid footing right now, where maybe you haven't had that in a while with that combination of people?
I am still not 100% sold on Don Waddell. I like Jarmo Kekalainen as a GM a lot. I know that he kind of stumbled towards the end there, made some frankly silly moves, I think, to try and speed up a rebuild or force the Blue Jackets back into relevance, etc. But I liked most of his work. I thought he was a good drafter. I'm not sold on Don Waddell yet. I think he's made some good moves, and I also think he's made some less good moves. For better or worse, he doesn't move fast. So that typically means he doesn't rush into stupid things, but it also means that sometimes he misses out on things because he doesn't quite move at the pace that is required to jump on some things, right? Dean Evason, I'm thrilled with. I was cautious about him. I talked to Seth Topal of Locked On Wild, who obviously would, be the best source of knowledge about this. And he was like, he's a good coach, good guy, relies on veterans too much. And I was like, oh, great, because we've just come out of 2 head coaches that did just that, and the team suffered for it. And then he came here, and you've got these young players playing significant minutes, playing big roles in the lineup. Like, again, Adam Fantilli really kind of came into himself under Dean Evason. Same with Kent Johnson. Kromachenko looks like a new man under this coaching. And I'm just really, really thrilled with what Dean Evason has done. And again, just to kind of go back to the Gaudreau of it all, how do you walk into a room like that as a new head coach and bring that team together, and again, similarly with the GM, you take this job and you're really, really excited. And then 2 months later, this awful tragedy happens. How do you make your impact on that team and still deal with this tragedy that's happening, right? And I think that they both carried themselves very well after the initial tragedy. And then kind of, again, I think Dean Evason did a really, really great job this season. And I think he's exactly what this team needs. Less convinced on Don Waddell, but I've been wrong before, I'll be wrong again, right? So we'll see how it goes. He's only been here for 14, 15 months. There's time still for him to make his own true impact on this team, because at the minute, it is just kind of, this is the team that Jarmo Kekalainen built. Waddell is just kind of tweaking things in it. So give it another 2 seasons, see where we're at with Waddell, and then I'll probably have a better idea of how I feel about him. But I would say cautiously optimistic for the future under Waddell and Evason.
Shoot, you got one more for Jay?
I'm good.
All right, then we're good. The Columbus Blue Jackets are going to open up their season at home October the 9th against the Nashville Predators. Jay Forster is the local expert of the Blue Jackets. If you're a Blue Jackets fan, you need to subscribe to Locked On Columbus Blue Jackets for all the latest news and opinions on the team during the offseason and once the season gets going. Jay, we appreciate your time. Thanks for this, and look forward to your reports on the Blue Jackets on Locked On NHL GameNight once the season gets started.
For sure. Thanks for having me.
All right.
Thank you, Joe.
And that'll do it for this offseason look at the Columbus Blue Jackets. Shu and I are going to continue to give you these offseason looks of all 32 NHL teams. If you've missed your team, they're still available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Check those out. And until next time, I'm Eddie Garcia. He's Shukri Wrights. Thanks for listening and watching Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day.